6:35 and a half is our time here on Sky 99.5 FM as we take a quick look at the big stories trending today. Today, Tuesday, the 5th of June 2018. Got my digital copy of Trinidad and Tobago Garden in front of me, and the big story is the one that everybody is talking about. Fatal error. Vigilante justice victim dies. Residents admit brutal act wrong. Attackers face charges, says cops.
How was it determined which were the charges? Because a lot of people seem to have been involved. And this is sometimes, if you are even a witness in the presence of a vigilante action, you could be also liable to be charged. So you wait to see. Because and the thing is, another thing I read in the story is that if this guy had survived, Mr. McHutchinson, he would have been a vegetable. He would have been brain dead. Such was the ferocity of these people who thought that he was trying to abuse
rape or molest
a 5 or 6 year old, even though it never happened. It never happened because the mother went back to the people and said, this man attempting or whatever. But it seemed he had lost his way. He had gone by some family in that particular area. And he had gone to get cigarettes. He didn't find one in the place he knew, so he was walking, and so this child next to the playground. He answered, sometimes you use these familiar words, even though the people are not related to you, uncle or father or auntie or whatever. And this is what he said, and the mother heard it, and she's got 1 and 1 is 3.
Oh boy. What we have on the line with us right now, Attorney at Law, member of the Police Service Commission, and also Vice President of the Tobago Chamber, Mr. Martin George. Good morning to you, Martin George.
Hi, good morning to you, and good morning
Martin
to your panel,
George.
and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Martin George, we're leaning on your legal expertise this morning a little bit with regard to this terrible story with this guy. People thought that he was going to be doing something terrible to a child in the neighborhood. They took matters into their own hands, and now this man is dead, and it turns out it was a mistake.
Well, Jessime, it brings to mind, so many scenarios of this type of thing happening otherwise. And I will just, point to, I think, one of the most high-profile and well-known examples of vigilante justice, which ended in murder, and that's the George Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin matter.
Yes.
If you recall, because that's an element that people sometimes forget. Remember, George Zimmerman, he was the head of the neighborhood watch in his area, and he was out roaming the streets, looking to make sure that everything is safe and stuff like that. Trayvon Martin was there innocently visiting some friends and relatives in the neighborhood. It was a gated community, and he had just left, and he was on his way home when George Zimmerman confronted him.
Because you stereotyped him, huh?
That's right.
He had all the hoodie and everything else, thinking he was some black bandit.
And that was a major part of the prosecutor's closing argument, that, look, this was clearly a case of vigilante justice, because George Zimmerman was basically looking...
He went out there looking for trouble.
To take the law into his own hands in those circumstances. So we must really remember, that there are consequences to these things, and you cannot just, act on it, like that. I mean, you remember George Zimmerman was tried. I mean, unfortunately, he was freed. But, at the end of the day, you can face criminal charges for these types of actions.
The thing is, though, can we say that these people went looking for trouble in a similar manner?
It doesn't matter whether you went looking for it or not. The point is, once you participated, Jessime, that's where the danger lies, right? Because you have the criminal concepts that you must bear in mind of joint enterprise.
Yes.
Say for instance, two persons go to rob someone, right? They have no intention of killing. Let's use the example of what happened with former Commissioner of Prisons Michael Hercules. Remember, somewhere in
the Barataria there,
in Pittsburgh. Yes. He was murdered during the course of a robbery. Now, and you recall one of the answers that the mother of one of the young boys...
Yes, he just went to get something.
Interview. Very shockingly, she said, well, he didn't go to kill nobody, he just went to rob. The point is, once you are part of that illegal enterprise, if it results in the death of someone, then you can be charged for murder because you basically have to stand the consequences of your actions.
But Mr. George, if they cannot identify, because it's a group of people, if they cannot personally identify individuals, how would that case unravel?
Well, that's where the police have to do their work. I don't know if they have any video footage, if they will have to interview persons, they will have to try and get, fairly solid evidence as to who exactly participated in this. So that's where they need to go on the ground and do their work, because clearly this is not a scenario that ought to be left, without some sort of redress, because it cannot be that you can take a life or take the law into your own hands and, kill somebody because you think that you are doing the right thing. That's not how our system works. Otherwise, it's a total breakdown of law and order. If you recall also this scenario which occurred in the UK in 2013, where this disabled man was murdered again by a vigilante mob. And in fact, interestingly enough, and this one is serious because it's a case of Bijan Ibrahimi. All right, he was somebody who they suspected, to be a pedophile, and wrongly so again. You see, this is the interesting thing, eh? So it just shows how people need to be careful, because in the two cases I've cited so far, the attackers were wrong in their suspicions. Right? Trayvon Martin wasn't any criminal. He was just trying to make his way home. In the case of Bijan Ibrahimi in Bristol in the United Kingdom in 2013, he was a 44-year-old man who was beaten to death and his body set on fire by neighbors who wrongly believed that he was a pedophile.
Oh my. And
in this matter, a police officer was also convicted because he was part of the mob behavior.
So every member of the mob would have been. Is it that every member of the mob would have been tried?
Well, those who were actually part of the killing. Those who were actually part of the killing. Now, the police officer, he was convicted of misconduct in the matter. All right, but there were others who were convicted of murder. But the point is, even a police officer who participates in this kind of thing, if it is that you act on it without lawful authority or without, going through the due process of law, you can be charged and convicted. So we need to understand that. We also remember in Maruga some years ago, and I mean, this is just taking it the other way, just to point out the aspect of even the police have a responsibility, where there was a claim of the unlawful shooting by the police, and I think 7 police officers are now facing charges before the court for the murder of somebody. So we need to understand that, look, as much as we may be incensed by the crime wave and, that type of thing, it still does not allow us the liberty to cross that line and take the law into our own hands.
How far does a citizen's arrest go, Mr. George?
Well, right, a citizen's arrest is something else. If it is that, I mean, you use reasonable means to subdue someone, maybe, maybe tie their hands behind their back, and then you call the police and let the police take over, because you must have very good cause for even effecting that citizen's arrest. It can't just be on your suspicion. If you actually see someone committing the crime, then I guess you could attempt to do so. But still, it does not involve you now taking out vengeance on the person by then starting to beat the person and, kick them and cuff them and, that kind of thing. We need to be careful. I can fully empathize with the members of the public who feel that sense of outrage and frustration at the spiraling crime wave and, the way things are going. But on the other hand, we still always need to temper it with, good sense, reason, and discretion.
Martin George, the thing is, though, that, if it's a situation where, these people come across someone committing a crime, the rage, the anger, that emotion, no one is going to have a clear head. in that scenario, even though they may be aware that should they lose control and worst comes to worst, that everybody will be facing some jail time. I mean, how can you prevent what may be a genuine neighborhood watch from becoming, a vigilante mob? How do you do it?
It's the same type of situation where each and every one of us has the responsibility to put a check on our emotions and guard our tempers, our anger, etc. And it's not just in a vigilante situation, even in, say, for instance, a domestic situation between a husband and wife. They may be arguing over something. If one doesn't control oneself in that situation, then you could end up with, like what we see sometimes, the murder-suicide, because people let their emotions get the better of them. So it's not just a vigilante situation. It's just basic human nature that we need to understand that, look, yes, there are things that will enrage us and incite us to, want to go to the extreme, but that's where our higher powers of reasoning and common sense, are supposed to kick in. And then you're supposed to say, well, look, let me balance it. Let me, not go to the extreme. That's something you need for everyday life, yes. Not just in a vigilante situation.
I need to take a quick break, Martin George. But when we come back, I need you to clearly define for us this issue of self-defense, because apart from this situation in Orapun that happened recently, we've had reports over the last couple years of people defending themselves against bandits or someone coming to do them harm in a home invasion scenario, among other situations. So I need you to clarify that for us when we come back.
Okay, sure.
Connect with us online. Join us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and SoundCloud. Search Sky 995 FM.
We're looking at the issue of mob justice here in Trinidad and Tobago, and we've got on the line with us Senior Attorney at Law Martin George. He's also a member of the Police Service Commission. And Martin George, anytime we're talking about vigilantism, we also have to talk about self-defense. Is there a fine line? A community may be saying, we are trying to defend ourselves and protect ourselves. And the law may interpret it as vigilantism. By the same token, we have on record on more than one occasion, someone takes the life of someone who broke into their home, who threatened their life and their life and the life of their family members and their property. And they managed to subdue this person, either seriously injure them or kill them. But the law comes down on the person who would have been attacked by the person who was eventually injured or killed. That issue of self-defense, define that clearly for us, please.
Okay, so what you have to look at, you must take each case on its own merit in terms of the level of the threat to your life, the lives of your family or those around you in the immediate vicinity, all right, and the level of force that you use in retaliation. Okay, so if it is that a man is standing in your yard with a knife, and you are behind your burglar-proof gate and you shoot him from there and kill him, then it's difficult to say that you were in immediate threat for your life, because you are behind your locked burglar-proof. The person has a knife out in your yard. I mean, they are a threat, I agree, but is that an immediate threat to your life? So I don't think in such a circumstance, you pointing a gun through your burglar-proof bars and shooting and killing the person is going to be justified or could be claimed as self-defense. So I use that as an extreme example just to show that, look, we must measure and balance the level of threat and what you meet it with. If you recall, for instance, there was the scenario, I think, a couple of years ago where Mr. Former Queen's Counsel, Mr. Carl Hudson Phillips, he, I think, was out liming late some night and, on his way to his car, I think, he was attacked by a man on the street. and I think he produced his firearm and he shot the guy, and I think the guy was killed. And that was held to be, justifiable in the circumstance because he was under direct, immediate threat. But the point is, you always have to, and of course it's difficult for us to, it's easy for us to sit, in the comfort of hindsight and with the benefit of 20/20 vision and say, well, they could have measured it better and, taken more, precautionary measures. But in the heat of the moment, it's difficult for you to do that type of balancing act, but still the law requires you to do that and not go to the extreme.
Mr. Martin George, in this context also, where does murder begin? Where does manslaughter finish? Does murder necessarily have to be you go with an intent to kill, but or is manslaughter in this kind of self-protection scenario, somebody dies?
Well, to put it broadly, and I must emphasize very broadly, so don't take it as the strict, narrow legal defining of it, because the circumstances would always be different in each scenario. But to put it broadly, for murder, there must be that intent ab initio to kill. In other words, you must go with that intention that, look, this is what I intend to do. Right? Manslaughter would be where someone dies as an unintended consequence of your action. So manslaughter would be where you don't have any intention to kill anybody, but as a result of your action, somebody dies. So in other words, take for instance something like motor manslaughter. You're driving at a very high rate of speed along the road. Somebody dashes across the road. If you were driving within the speed limit and at a moderate speed, you would have been able to stop in time. But because you were driving excessively, you were not able to stop in time, the person is killed, then you could be charged for motor manslaughter. So as a result of your action, someone was killed. You never intended to kill anybody. You didn't go out there planning to kill anybody, but the person died as a result of your actions. So therefore, that's where you'd have manslaughter. If, for instance, you have a husband and wife in a divorce battle, and the husband is driving along the road and sees the wife, and he aims the car at her and deliberately runs her over, then that's murder. You recall, I think it was in San Fernando, I think last year or year before, where there was this scenario where a young boy was trying to help a woman who was being beaten, and the man jumped into his vehicle and deliberately aimed it at the guy.
Yes,
I remember that, yes. Arima.
So therefore he was charged with murder, So that's a broad distinction between the two.
So the bottom line is your mind is set at the time that the act is committed.
Right. So
more or less.
Right. I'll just use the legal terms. There's the mens rea and the actus rea. The mens rea means the mental intention. In other words, if you and someone else, you plot to go and kill somebody, then you have the mens rea. The actus rea would be the physical act of doing it. Now, I'll just further to explain. If you recall the case of Nankisun Budram, also known as Dole Chedi.
Yes.
Remember, he and his henchmen were charged and they were convicted and subsequently hung for murder. Now remember, and this is where mens rea and actus rea is important, Mr. Nankisun Budram, also known as Dole Chedi, himself, he was never physically present at the home of the Babulal. He was never present. He didn't pull any trigger. He didn't point any gun at all. But the mens rea, he clearly was shown to have had it by the prosecution, by them showing that, look, he's the mastermind behind it. So he organized it. So even though you may not physically pull the trigger, you could still be convicted of murder if you are the mastermind behind the entire enterprise.
Mr. George, is it surprising that we have reached this level of vigilantism in the country, considering the response of the law authorities, the frustration, the impotence that a lot of us are feeling?
No, it's not surprising, but the thing is, it's something that we need to guard ourselves against, because you see, just exactly what happened here,
Yes.
where you have an innocent person who ends up being murdered as a result of it. That's the risk we face. So that's why we need to be very, very careful and not rush to judgment and to taking the law into our own hands in those circumstances. If they had simply arrested the guy, tied him, and called the police without beating him, then we wouldn't even be discussing this,
Yes.
Today. But the point is, they went to the extreme, and worse yet, it turns out the person was innocent, and same way in the case of the case in Bristol that I mentioned earlier. That guy was totally innocent, and they not only beat him, but they set him on fire.
Yes.
Burned him to death.
It is a clear indication of where our society is when people are driven to do that kind of thing, to make those kinds of judgments, to assume these things of other human beings. It's scary, isn't it?
I always say to persons in Trinidad and Tobago, we still always need to temper our thoughts, words, and deeds with a level of moderation and discretion. And
yes.
I mean, it goes even in terms of, you look at some of the postings you see online, on Facebook, the public is always quick to rush to judgment, and they say the most awful things about people. And, sometimes it may be totally unjustified, totally without merit, totally without any basis. So we need, I think, to exercise a level of restraint in that regard before we, rush to judgment to condemn persons, because at the end of the day, sometimes things may not always be what they appear to be.
Thank you.
We always have to bear that in mind.
Thank you so much, Martin George, for giving us time this morning. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Edison Carr, Jesse May Venture, and Dr. Wayne Haywood on the Breakfast Roundtable on Sky 99.5 FM.